Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Mike Bond is back. He is a nominee for the category of Best Journalist at World MMA Awards. He, along with MMA Junkie, would love to get your vote. Go to worldmmaawards.com/nominees. Holy moly, it's Nolan King, the AKA Boston shot caller, ready to share his wisdom here on SBC. Goes from MMA Junkie Radio, rounds out the crew today. Check out MMA Junkie Radio on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Omni. Goes will also double up on the ones and twos. Let's get started. Guys, this past weekend, one of the greats in our sport let us know he ain't done yet. Demetrious Johnson defeated Adriano Moraes to become the one championship flyweight champion. Right cross, followed by a knee, and it was all over. Though it should have been. Good night, Irene. Where was Chavello, guys? What was your immediate reaction to that KO? And in your mind, has Mighty Mouse reacquired the number one spot in the division that he ruled for so many years? 4 minutes are on the clock. Mike, you're leading off.
Well, initial reaction, of course, the beautiful knockout by Demetrious Johnson. I mean, if you looked into that fight at the weigh-in face-off, you're like, is he fighting a flyweight? Is this guy even a flyweight? Like, what did he actually weigh? We don't really know. I mean, a lot of questions still to be answered about one championships, rehydration rules, and weight cutting and all that stuff. But that just made the feat by Demetrious Johnson that much more remarkable to put that guy down and finish him in that fashion. Someone who was on a roll like Moraes. I mean, one of the more impressive wins, I think, of Demetrious Johnson's career, just the way it all went down, avenging the loss, all that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, that's one that he definitely needs to hang on the wall as one of his better career moments, in my opinion. As far as where it puts him in the landscape of our 125 rankings, I think the conversation is probably more intriguing than ever, right? Because there's not a ton of crossover between him and the current top of the UFC flyweight division. He never fought Deiveson Figueiredo. He never fought Brandon Moreno. So I think there's arguments to be made really either way. I think if you include the overall resume, it's probably got to be DJ. I know all three of those guys I just mentioned have had losses within their past few fights. But in my mind, if you look at everything Demetrious has done, the UFC run, what he's done and won now, winning the tournament, winning the flyweight belt, I think he's our number one guy right now. But I'm sure whenever Moreno and Figueiredo do part 4, they'll have something to say about that.
Good stuff from Mike Bond. Nolan King, you're up next.
Yeah, man. Obviously, Demetrious, I think, kind of reinstated himself into the conscience this weekend. I think, I don't want to say people kind of forgot about him, but I think that the loss to Moraes maybe made people kind of put him on the back burner of their brain. Like, okay, he's in a different organization and now he's losing. We see fighters kind of, every fighter we've ever seen has gone over the hill and we've seen them lose and kind of trickle out. But I think he kind of reinstated himself this weekend. I think that obviously the eyeballs that were on this fight, on the result, from our perspective, the numbers we could see, people are still very interested in Demetrious Johnson, and for good reason, man. I mean, he's still a great fighter after all these years. He still finds ways to improve and evolve, and I think that that's one of the most impressive thing about some of these elite fighters is not necessarily their ability to get to the top, but then to make the adjustments and to figure it out while you're there. Not everybody can do that. So for him to go in there and essentially beat the guy that just beat him the same way that guy beat him, like the knee, everything, I think it was awesome. It was good for his brand. It was good for him to kind of make people remember and remind them that, hey, sure, maybe he might have a loss here and there at this point in his career, but he's still getting better. He's still super elite, and he's still, the best flyweight of all time.
Yeah, and we got to watch it live on a Friday night on a new platform. So that, along with the hardcores knowing what was up, big win for DJ.
Yeah, man, what I liked about it was the way he was able to adjust to the game plan, right? Like during the fight and even going back to the first fight, you could see all the adjustments he made. You could tell that he did his homework. It was a solid performance from him. You have to remember, he did get caught for 1 second. It did seem like it was going to go bad. But overall, I thought it was a really good performance for DJ. This question is kind of difficult to answer because of what Mike said, the weight classes that won and all that. So I think we did see a little vintage Demetrious Johnson. If you're going to ask me if you put him up against the hardest task possible, one fight, yeah, I think he could win it and be the guy at the top. But if you're going to ask me if he could put together a run, kind of what the guys in the UFC have to do, I don't know. I think he could beat Figueiredo. I think he could beat Moreno. I just don't think he could keep up that type of schedule where he has to face them over and over the way they have. So it's a difficult question, but I think right now, I think he's earned that spot to be up on top. But, these two fighters put on such great performances that they could easily snatch it right back. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, great performance by DJ. Great discussion by you guys. But we got to move on to the next topic. All right, if you recall, back in the fall of 2018, the UFC and One Championship traded Demetrious Johnson and Ben Askren to one another. Basically, the UFC released Johnson from his contract so One Championship could sign him. One Championship released Askren from his contract so the UFC could sign him. That's the way it worked, guys. Johnson has gone 4-1 at One Championship since then. Askren has went 1-2. I say went because he retired from MMA. Is it as clear as those records, though, that one got the better end of the deal? Almost 4 years later, how would you grade that deal for each side? Nolan, 4 minutes on the clock. It's on you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, not to be too inspecific here, but I think it's been great I think it was a good move for both sides. And some people might be surprised by that, seeing Askren's tenure in the UFC, a few fights, didn't really go his way, he didn't find much success, and then he was gone. But for me, I mean, we know it again, like, not to peel back the curtain too much here, but when Ben Askren was in the UFC, the numbers that he was pulling, the interest that was in him, the amount of views we got on everything surrounding him, there's a reason he went on to fight Jake Paul. It's because he's a super popular guy. I think the UFC for those 3 fights, three or four fights, got a lot of juice out of that squeeze of Ben Askren. And granted, the Demetrious story is still unfolding. It's a longer term thing, so I guess we'll have to really weigh it at the end of Demetrious Johnson's One Championship career to really finally get a full perspective on it. But I think that people have to realize that Ben Askren, when he was in the UFC, was a star. He might not have had performances. He might not have been, a Conor McGregor name, so to speak, but he certainly drew a lot of eyeballs and made the UFC a lot of money. So I'm going to start to lean towards DJ just because I think that the longevity of his One Championship run will probably come into play, and he'll continue to make American audiences watch One Championship and get introduced to it over the next couple of years. But I think we can't underestimate what Ben Askren did popularity-wise when he was in the UFC.
All right, good call. How about you, Goes? What are your thoughts here?
It's a nightmare question, George. I'm going to sit on the fence, but I promise you'll get off at the end, all right? Look, Ben Askren, he was towards the end of his career. I'm not sure how much he had to give regardless, but he did have a good run with One. He gave them a lot. I think you could say One Championship was happy with Ben, and he was an honest guy over there. They get Demetrious Johnson, and I think – a lot of people will argue this is one of the greatest fighters to ever do it. And now, whenever you talk about Demetrious Johnson's legacy, you have to attach One Championship to it. And there's a lot of value for it. For the rest of time, you're going to have to put those two names together. There's tons of value for that. So don't forget what that does to One Championship stock. How many times do people say all the great fighters are in the UFC, yet he got a loss there at One Championship, right? So it raises the stock of their whole organization. Tons of value there. If you look at Ben Askren and his run in the UFC, it wasn't that long. You do have the highlight of Robbie Lawler, but then after that, I think he did have some contributions, but really, I think his biggest contribution was to somebody else, and that was putting over Jorge Masvidal. And look at what the UFC was able to do with that, right? That was worth a lot as well. So you not only get what Ben Askren brings to the table, but he put over Jorge Masvidal, and I think there was a lot of value with that. So I think if I had to choose one, I'm going to go with Demetrious Johnson. I think it really helped One Championship, and I think that's going to continue going as we're Ben Askren run just over.
Mike Bond, is it unanimous, or are you the contrarian in the group?
I think everyone here makes good points, but I just want to, tail off what Goes said there about Jorge Masvidal and how they were able to kind of use Ben Askren to make him, a star in what he was. I mean, if you look, financial side, all that kind of stuff, Jorge Masvidal going on that run that ultimately, had that Ben Askren victory in it. Look what it led to. It led to the BMF title fight with Nate Diaz. It led to that Kamaru Usman fight on Fight Island, which did like 1 million pay-per-view buys. 1 million pay-per-view buys for the UFC is like 7 Demetrious Johnson fights. So for them on that side, if you look at kind of the financial element of it, that's a huge win for them, in terms of the money they made. Demetrious Johnson wasn't going to be able to do that for them ever, no matter how they promoted him, no matter what they did on that front. So I think if them, it's a huge win, but one championship, they've been able to, I think, maximize what Demetrious Johnson offers, kind of play into his personality more, give him a platform that suits him, and put him in front of an audience that appreciates him more. So I think there's winners all around, but if we need to click a vote somewhere, I'll give one to the UFC just from that financial profit they made.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we can all agree it kind of worked out in, ticking different boxes for both sides. And with one championship, they're not done yet. All right, fellas, I, for one, want to move on from one and talk about another fighter who won in March. Colby Covington wants to fight again, and UFC President Dana White is looking for a possible opponent. Help Dana out with the matchmaking, give him an opponent, and if you really want to impress the audience, give us a date, one of those fight cards that's floating out there. November in New York, December in Vegas, January in Rio de Janeiro. They're probably headed to the UK in February. Go, guys, goes. Your first 4 minutes.
I was one of those guys that kind of just thought this wouldn't be possible. I thought Colby Covington would be locked up in legal stuff. So had this come to light a little sooner, I would have said the perfect guy would have been Belal Muhammad. He's got a little heat there. Belal Muhammad has been very vocal about wanting that fight. And I think that's what makes Colby Covington a little bit more fired up and more entertaining. But now that he already has an opponent, there's not very much you can do here. Obviously, he's not gonna fight Jorge Masvidal again, at least not in the cage. But why not do this? You asked for a card. It seems like the cards are kind of booked up. Why not just create one and you do it this way? Give Jorge Masvidal a striker in Jeff Neal, and then flip it and give Gilbert Burns with Colby Covington. I think that'd be a 1-2 punch that would be pretty fun. You could kind of revisit that Brazil angle. Colby Covington said a lot of things. Now, I don't think that could happen in Rio de Janeiro. I think the days of Colby Covington going over there, that's over. So that's why I say you got to kind of create a new card. But really the matchup for Colby Covington that he has to watch out is that Edwards and Usman rematch, because that just opens up the world to a guy like Colby Covington, a guy that we're probably not going to be able to see too much of him because of those losses to the champ. That would open things up. I think the UFC is better off with Colby Covington, so hopefully we get to see him soon.
The question is, if Burns handle business, will Yanez send him a PayPal back as a replay? Mike Bond, what you got?
All I really want out of Colby Covington at this point is to see him fight a guy coming off a win or maybe a couple of wins. We haven't seen that in a long time. Look at his last 3 victories. Jorge Masvidal, 2 losses in a row. Tyron Woodley, 2 losses in a row. Robbie Lawler, 2 losses in a row. I want to see if he can beat a guy that's on the way up, that's putting something together. And that's why I thought Jeff Neal's call out of Colby recently was a great one. He's obviously coming off a huge win of his own against Vicente Luque. He's doing some nice things. He's kind of cracked into that upper echelon of the division now. And when Neal made his call out of him on social media, it did a lot of good interaction from what I saw. A lot of people were interested, a lot of comments and stuff. So I think that's a good fight to make at this point. But Jorge Masvidal Colby Covington against any of those guys in the top 5, I think would be a great fight for me. But yeah, I just think he needs to beat a guy that's, has some momentum behind him as opposed to a guy that's, skidding at the moment. And as far as the card that you put it on, I think really there's any of the options you said there. I think, past up to November is probably pretty full at this point. The December pay-per-view would make sense. A fight night maybe in December or January, something like that, so you could have it a headliner. So I think that's the one that kind of makes sense for me. But yeah, just give me Colby Covington against any guy in the top 5 who's doing something on the upward trajectory.
Yeah, November is nice, 2 title fights, but as sick as October is, I think November could use a little splash. If not, bring it to Vegas. I hear you guys. Nolan, round it up.
Yeah, obviously there's some options here. We'll have to see how everything unfolds, and who there's some big fights coming up in the next couple months. So I guess it really depends on when Colby is he actually looking for right now? Is he just going to say, hey, I want to schedule it for the beginning of next year? Like, we don't know how quickly he wants to turn around. So for me, I think Khamzat Chimaev, depending on what happens with him, I know he's kind of indicated that he's not one to sit around and wait for opportunities. He would have to wait for Leon versus Kamaru 3. We saw recently he took the Diaz fight just simply to stay active. So perhaps he would do that again with Colby Covington. And what a fight that would be. What a buildup that would be. So if the stars align, let's say, maybe December, if not February.
Nice. All right, guys. I was starting to think, as you were saying, Khamzat versus Colby on the undercard of Leon versus Kamaru. Holy cow. In the UK, That
one
would
needs
be
5 rounds, though, I think. I like, maybe they circle back to what Dana said, earlier this year of doing it as like a main event on ABC or something. I think that would be a good fit for it.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a good idea as well. 5 rounds would be nice. All right, we got to move on to the fourth topic. Rafael dos Anjos admitted he's done with chasing the title, said he wanted veteran fights. What do we make of this? Is it respectable to have this stance and do it publicly? And should the UFC honor his request? As UFC lightweight Arman Sarukian pointed out, could it be unfair for him to remain unranked, or to remain ranked if not pursuing the belt and also not giving a chance to the rising names who are climbing up? 4 minutes are on the clock. Mike, we're coming back to you.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, I thought, when RDA put out this tweet, just because you don't see it very often. I mean, he's been all about, one more run, I want to get the title again. And for him to kind of come out and say, I'm done with that chapter of my career, let me just end it on some, veteran matchups, some rematches, some guys there in a similar place. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? But I think what Arman Sarukian tweeted him being like, hey, man, like, if you aren't on your way up, if you aren't trying to get to that title shot, get out of the rankings and make room for guys like myself and Jalen Turner and all these guys who are on the climb and trying to get in that position and have that hunger. So I can see both sides of it. I'm inclined to, agree with someone like a Arman Sarukian there because, you saw the people RDA was asking for. It's the Clay Guidas, it's the Jim Millers. Those guys aren't close to being ranked right now. So what does having him in that position really do? So I think it's a pretty interesting one for him to do that. The UFC definitely is not obliged to give him these fights. I mean, we've seen people in positions like this. They want to use the younger crop to build him, build them up off his name, as we saw with, Rafael Fiziev just in the last fight. I'm sure if they had their way, that's what they would do. That's, the best promotional practice to do that. But we know RDA is a future Hall of Famer. He deserves, a somewhat graceful exit from the sport, if anyone. But will the UFC give it to him? I think their history dictates and shows probably not. So it's going to be interesting to see what type of matchmaking we see from him going forward.
Yeah, I was thinking of Damian Maia. I mean, it kind of didn't work out that way where he had a final match. So you're right there, Mike. All right, Nolan, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, it is. It's like Mike said, it's complicated. I think that when you are sitting in the rankings in the top 10 to just start taking veteran fights, I'm not sure that that's really necessarily what the UFC wants to do. And I wouldn't honestly blame them, like, if they didn't go that route, because I'm very much for the Donald Cerrone's versus Joe Lozon matchups for those guys, for the guys that have already fallen out of the rankings, that seem like they need something to get some momentum going. And I don't want to see them fight, a 12-0 Dana White's Contender Series guy from Russia and get beat up at age 42 after they've been knocked out 6 times in a row. We've seen that enough times. I don't need that. But when you've got guys in the rankings like Rafael dos Anjos, like Stephen Thompson recently is another example, guys that are holding down those rankings and are essentially saying, I don't want to fight the other contenders. I don't think the UFC, like, as much as I like these guys, I respect them. I don't mind them even taking like maybe a step back for one fight, but just to continue to say that's the path that I'm going to go. I think that poses some problems for you, in trying to get a divisional flow and try to build contenders. I mean, if the old guys never fought the young guys, then we would have no new contenders. So for me, I get where RDA is coming from, but I also don't think that I wouldn't blame the UFC if they didn't necessarily give him what he wanted.
Yeah, I appreciated his honesty, but this one's going to be tough. What do you think, Goes?
I mean, I guess I have no problem with his stance. I just have a problem with him saying it out loud. His logic's not crazy, and like you guys said, we've seen it. We've seen it with Jim Miller. We've seen it with Clay Guida, Joe Lozon, Donald Cerrone. We've seen these things happen, but I don't think it's going to happen with a guy like RDA. I think he's just a little bit further in the pecking order than what those guys are at. And honestly, look, if you say it publicly, you're going to get these people that are going to come out and say these things. That's just the world we live in. But I think RDA is being a little bit hard on himself because honestly, okay, things may have not gone his way the last fight, but really right time, right place, you never know what can happen. Look what happened to Michael Bisping's career. Look what happened to Matt Serra's career. RDA has always been that guy that you could always count on to be there. So you never know what could lie for you out there, bigger things. But to hope for this to happen in this day and age with the way the UFC does things, I just don't see it happening at all. He's going to get some young fighters.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. We'll have to get clarified from the UFC side, see what they think. All right, guys, we got to wrap up here. Last one. This weekend, we have UFC Fight Night 209 in Paris, France. Two absolute bangers at the top of the bill, even though neither contest is technically for a title. Frenchman number 3, Cyril Gane, hosts Aussie. Oh, yeah. Number 4, Tai Tuivasa in the main event. And in the co-main event, we have number 2, Robert Whittaker facing number 3, Marvin Vettori in the co-main event. I may have just repeated that. Now, those are USA Today sports rankings. So those are top guys in both the heavyweight and the middleweight division. Between the following 3 former title challengers, who has the most realistic path towards another title shot? Cyril Gane, Marvin Vettori, and Robert Whittaker. Those are your 3 choices. Focus on the word realistic because, as you all know, all 3 of these cats have had a title shot in the last 14 months. Nolan, take it away. 4 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think we can do addition by subtraction here. Looking at it, we got Marvin Vettori, who has already lost twice to Israel Adesanya. So I think he's already a step behind the other 2. You've got Cyril Gane coming off a recent loss to Francis Ngannou, and you've got Robert Whittaker, who's lost twice to Israel as well. So the reason that I'm differentiating Vettori from Whittaker is I think everyone knows how thin that margin of error is between Izzy and Robert. I think that it would take literally all that would need to happen for him to be right there, people calling for a title shot, would be either Izzy loses or, again, this round robin thing where there's no other contenders, which has happened. We've seen it once before. We've seen it where he's the only option, and I could really realistically see that happening again. I mean, sure, you've got Sean Strickland up there. He's got a big fight coming up against Jared Cannonier. I guess he's a fresh face. But outside of that, and Alex Pereira, I mean, Robert Whittaker I think is like 1 or 2 fights away where, I mean, are people going to really complain like a year and a half from now when Whittaker wins a few more fights and say Izzy does as well, that this fight is the one to make again? I'm not really sure. You know, I guess it is repetitive, but to me, I think Whittaker certainly has a step up on Vettori. And again, Cyril Gane, he fought back in January, but I don't think people are necessarily looking at the fight against Francis as having a thinner margin of difference between the champion and challenger as Whittaker and Izzy. So I'm going to lean with that. I don't necessarily, to be honest with you, see really any 3 of them getting it like in the next year or so. So perhaps things will change, circumstances will change, there'll be new champs, but I would have to side with Whittaker just because I think he's solidified himself as the second best middleweight in the world.
All right. How about you, Goes?
Well, I think the stats don't help any of us here, right? So when you can't go to the stats, you can't go to records, really what you have to do is you have to look at some controversy, some heat, right? Who better to give you that than Marvin Vettori, right? All it takes is for him to shove him, say something crazy, and before you know, Izzy gets going, and next thing you know, we have a fight. Plus, Marvin Vettori is an anytime, any place type cat, so you could always see him slipping in. I don't see him as the type of guy that sits there and argues over location, argues over money. It could just be a scenario where he just kind of is the easiest guy to deal with, and he gets a shot like that. You have Costa beating Rockhold, which kind of helps his resume a little bit. He's a fun fighter to watch. But really, when you think about our fan base, right, it's not all hardcores. They're not all going to look at the records. A lot of them are just going to be motivated, especially if it's something like an ABC card or something like that, where all you need is just a little bit of heat. And the next thing you know, people are talking about this fight. So I would have to go with Marvin Vettori on this one, guys.
All right. And rounding things up, it's Mike Bond.
Yeah, I think those are some good cases for the middleweights, but we definitely need to say bonjour to Cyril Gane because I think he's got a good chance here. I mean, especially we know heavyweight, man. His middleweight is thin, heavyweight's even thinner, and he's only had his one crack. He was the interim champion. If we get this, Francis Ngannou, John Jones fight, and John Jones wins, he's going to need some new guys to fight. And his reign in that division, I think Gane would be right there. So I think he's obviously, showed some big flaws in his game in the first fight with Ngannou. But before that was happening and he was getting taken down, that fight was very competitive there. So I think as long as he shores up some holes, I think he's got a good case to be right up there. And, heavyweight is just such a topsy-turvy division that really anything can happen in there. So I think if Gane gets a good win this weekend, he puts himself right in the conversation. We just need to see how some other fights play out. So I like his case best, but I definitely think Vettori, Whittaker, they got a good chance as well. I know Izzy has kind of lapped the division twice at this point. There's only a handful of guys left. I think if he wants to stay at middleweight and, continue defending that title, one of these guys is going to be good enough to get a third shot.
Yeah. You know, I was also thinking Miocic and Jones. I mean, I guess I don't know if they're difficult or the UFC is being stubborn or what, but you know, you almost have to cast those two aside if something doesn't happen. It's literally been 3 years for Jones and almost 2 years for Miocic. So anyway, all right, great stuff, guys. Folks, we got you covered here at MMA Junkie throughout the week for the UFC Paris card, of course, Dana White Contender Series, and all the other great promotions here in the sport. And I want to thank all three of the panelists for today's Spinning Back Clique. We will be here next week to cover it all on SBC.